Hi there, welcome to my YouTube channel Dhyani classes. If you are watching my video for the first time, do subscribe my channel, hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever new video will be uploaded. So in today's video we will cover the first part of the chapter, the last lesson written by Alphonse Daudet from class 12 CBSE. So let's get started. Let's talk about the author. Alphonse Daudet was a French novelist and short story writer. The last lesson is set in the days of Franco-Prussian War 1870 to 1871, in which France was defeated by Prussia led by Bismarck. Prussia then consisted of the nations of Germany, Poland and parts of Austria. In this story, the French districts of Alsace and Lorraine have passed into Prussian hands. Read the story to find out what effects this had on life at school. The last lesson is a very beautiful story written by Alphonse Daudet, and this lesson talks about the language and its importance to the citizen of a country and tells us that it is the duty of every citizen to safeguard the language of the country as it is the identity of that country. So this lesson also talks about how after defeating France in the war, the Prussians wanted to rule over not only the territory of France but also over the minds and hearts of the people. So the story reinforces the fact that we value something more than when it is lost, and the pain of the students and the teacher is proved as every realizes how things were taken for granted. So this lesson also illustrated that the importance of the mother tongue for everyone and the need to realize the fact that it is our language which gives us our identity, respect and freedom. So let's begin with the first part of the chapter now. Let's notice these expressions in the text, infer their meaning from the context. In a great dread of, that means frightened or scared of something. In unison, that means something happening at the same time. Counted on, that means to rely or trust on somebody or something. A great bustle, that means creating a lot of noise continuously. Thumbed at the edges, that means worn or soiled edges. Reproach ourselves with, that means express disapproval. So let's begin with the line by line explanation of the chapter now. I started for school very late that morning and I was in great dread of scolding, especially because M. Hamel had said that he would question us on participles and I did not know the first word about them. So here the author is saying that I started for school very late that morning. That means he had started very late for the school on that day when he was in a great dread of scolding. That means he was so frightened and scared, and says especially because M. Hamel had said that he would question us on participles. So this boy was so frightened because his teacher gave him some homework to learn French grammar and said he would question him on participles, and says I did not know the first word about them. So he didn't do his homework at all, and even he don't know anything about French grammar. And on the other hand, he started very late that morning, and then he was feeling very frightened and scared because his teacher M. Hamel would ask him a question on participles and then he would scold him if he is not going to answer properly. Further he says, for a moment I thought of running away and spending the day out of doors. So here the narrator is saying that for a moment I thought of running away. That means he thought, instead of going to the school, let me go to somewhere else, because he had started very late for the school on that day, and says spending the day out of the doors. That means he was planning to go somewhere else and spend all his time somewhere outside. So he was planning to go somewhere else just because of his teacher M. Hamel told him that he would ask him questions about French participles, and then he wanted to escape the class for the day, and says it was so warm, so bright. So the day was so hot and so bright, that means it was so tempting outside. And when he was walking all around, he saw the birds were chirping at the edge of the woods, and in the open field back of the sawmill the Prussian soldiers were drilling. So here he saw many birds sitting at the edge of the woods and chirping. That means birds were making a lot of noise, and in the open field back of the sawmill the Prussian soldiers were drilling. So there was open ground just behind the sawmill, that means just behind the factory or paper mill, and he saw the Prussian soldiers were drilling. That means they were doing their regular practice. So he thought that he should spend some time there and have some fun looking at these beautiful sights. So chirping means making a lot of noise and drilling means practicing. It was all much more tempting than the rules for participles, but I had to stand to resist and hurried off to school. So here the author is saying that it was all much more tempting. That means it was more interesting to see the soldiers practicing and listening chirping the birds than the rules for participle, because it was very hard for him to read and understand French grammar, and says, but I had the strength to resist. So he thought that he should go back to the school and kill his desire to see all these beautiful scenes, and hurried off to school. That means he started walking towards the school very fast, and says, when I passed the town hall there was a crowd in front of the bulletin board. So as he was walking and sometime running, and says, when I passed the town hall there was a crowd. So as he was on his way to school and reached the town hall, and he saw there was a crowd in front of the bulletin board. So bulletin board means a notice board where they can get to read all the news and other important information. For the last 2 years, all our bad news had come from there, the lost battles, the draft, the orders of the commanding officer, and I thought to myself without stopping, what can be the matter now? So here the little Franz is saying that for the last 2 years, all our bad news had come from there. That means he is talking about the bulletin board that was there in front of the town hall, where many people were standing together and reading something from the bulletin board, and says, for the last 2 years all our bad news used to come, and people used to get to know about the lost battles, the draft, the orders of the commanding officer. So these kind of news used to come there, and says, I thought to myself without stopping, what can be the matter now? That means he was thinking himself while running that what could be this time, and why these people is standing in front of the bulletin board, and what is the news is all about. Further he says, then as I hurried by as fast as I could go, the blacksmith Watcher, who was there with his apprentice reading the bulletin, called after me, don't go so fast, Bob, you will get to your school in plenty of time. So here the author is saying that then as I hurried by as fast as I could go, that means as he was walking and sometime running as fast as he could go, because he had to reach the classroom before time. And then he saw blacksmith. That means he saw a person who makes iron stuffs by hand or repair iron stuffs. So he was standing there with Watcher, that means security guard, with his apprentice and reading the bulletin board, and called after me. So he was thinking that why these people were standing there, and immediately the blacksmith called him, don't go so fast, Bob. That means don't go so fast, little boy, and you will get to your school in a plenty of time. That means you will reach your school in no time, so don't go fast. And says, I thought he was making fun of me, and reached M. Hamel's little garden all out of breath. So while hurrying to school, the blacksmith advised him that don't go so fast, Bob, and he thought that he was making fun of me because the little Franz was hurrying to school, or because he was too late for the school. But little Franz ignored what he had said and kept moving towards the school, and reached M. Hamel's little garden all out of breath. That means as he was walking very fast, and due to this he was breathing very heavily with difficulties. And then finally he reached little garden which was owned by the teacher M. Hamel. So all out of breath means gasping for air or breathing with difficulties. Usually when school began, there was a great bustle which could be heard out in the street, the opening and closing of desks, lessons repeated in unison, very loud, with our hands over our ears to understand better, and the teacher's great ruler rapping on the table. So here the narrator is saying that usually when school began, that means when schools gets started every day, there was a great bustle that could be heard out in the street. That means children used to make a lot of noise out loud, and that could be heard outside. And says the opening and closing of desks, lesson repeated in unison. That means children used to adjust their desk all the time, and in this way they create a lot of noise, and then reading lessons out loud repeatedly together. And says with our hands over our ears to understand better. So due to lot of noise inside the class, the children used to keep their hand on their ears to avoid unnecessary noise. so that they could understand the lesson properly. And then the teacher's great ruler rapping on the table. So the teacher used to come and tap the stick on the table to make the children quiet inside the class. So these were the different kinds of noises that people could hear usually when the class were going on. Further he says, but now it was also still. I had counted on the commotion to get to my desk without being seen. So here the author is saying that but now it was also still. That means everything was quiet and calm inside the classroom and there was no sound coming outside, and says I had counted on the commotion to get to my desk without being seen. So the little Franz was planning to go inside the classroom very silently or without being seen, and he thought there would be a lot of noise and that moment would be good for him to go inside the class because he is already late for the school. And says, but of course that day everything had to be as quiet as Sunday morning. So he was planning to go inside the classroom very silently, but when he reached nearby the school, he got to know everything was quiet and calm there inside the classroom, as quiet as Sunday morning. And says, through the window I saw my classmates already in their places, and M. Hamel walking up and down with his terrible iron ruler under his arm. So when he came closer to the classroom, he looked through the window and says, I saw my classmates. That means in order to make sure whether the students are sitting inside the classroom or not, he looked through the window and says they were already in their places, and M. Hamel walking up and down with his terrible iron ruler under his arm. So he became very surprised to see his classmates, and everybody was sitting quiet and calm. And he also saw his teacher M. Hamel, and he was walking up and down with his terrible iron ruler under his arm. So in this way, he could not able to go inside the classroom because there was no commotion at all. Everything was quiet and calm, and everybody sitting in their places very silently. I had to open the door and go in before everybody. So here the narrator, the little Franz, is saying that I was planning to go inside the class, but then I had to open the door and go in before everybody. So he had to open the door of the classroom and go inside the classroom when everybody was looking at him, and says, you can imagine how I blushed and how frightened I was. So here he says that you can imagine how I blushed. That means how embarrassed or ashamed he was when everybody was watching him standing outside of the classroom, and how frightened I was. So he was very frightened and scared just because of his teacher M. Hamel, because he was very late to school and thought his teacher would scold him, and says, but nothing happened. So whatever he was thinking earlier, nothing had happened with him. That means his teacher did not scold him at all. And says, M. Hamel saw me and said very kindly, go to your place quickly, little Franz. So Franz became very happy when his teacher M. Hamel saw him standing outside the classroom and said, go to your place quickly, little Franz. So as soon as his teacher noticed him, he told him very softly and kindly to go your place and take your seat, little Franz, and says, we were beginning without you. So little Franz was very happy to see a change on M. Hamel, because he was expecting a scolding, but then his teacher spoke to him very politely instead of scolding him, and allowed him to come inside the classroom, and said, thank God you have come on time, otherwise we were beginning without you. I jumped over the bench and sat at my desk. So here he is saying that the little Franz is saying that his teacher allowed him to come inside the classroom. So at that time he was feeling quite satisfied, and then he came inside the classroom and sat down at his desk, and says, not till then, when I had got a little over my fright, did I see that our teacher had on his beautiful green coat, his frilled shirt, and the little black silk cap, all embroidered, that he never wore except on inspection and prize days. So as soon as he sat on his desk, he was feeling comfortable because his fear had vanished, and then he noticed his teacher something different and saw that his teacher wore a beautiful green coat and he wore a frilled shirt, that means a decorated shirt, and the little black silk cap he was wearing at that time, and his cap was also all embroidered. That means his cap was decorated with different patterns with thread, and says he never wore except on inspection and prize days. So his teacher M. Hamel used to wear this kind of dress only on special days. So he was thinking about why his teacher wore this dress today and what is the special about this day. Besides, the whole school seemed so strange and solemn. So here he is saying that when he entered the classroom, he saw something different and the whole school seemed so strange and solemn. That means everybody in the classroom was looking very serious and even they were not talking to each other and sitting very quietly. So this made little Franz very concerned and says, but the thing that surprised me most was to see on the back benches that were always empty, the blessed people sitting quietly like ourselves. So as he was thinking why the students sitting quietly, he saw something on the back of the class and this made him very surprised and he saw the blessed people sitting quietly like ourselves. So he got confused why these village people were sitting on the back benches and says, Old Hauser with his three-corner hat, the former mayor, the former postmaster and several others besides. So he saw Old Hauser, that means an old man. He was sitting besides the class and there he was wearing three-corner hat. The former mayor, that means a person who previously occupied the place, and the former postmaster and several others were sitting besides them. So he was wondering why these people were doing inside the classroom and why they are sitting very quietly and silently. Further he says everybody looked sad and Hauser had brought an old primer thumbed at the edges. So here he is saying that everybody looked sad. That means everybody in the classroom except village people were very sad and old Hauser had brought an old primer. That means there was an old man who brought an old book that is used in the primary classes and it was thumbed at the edges. That means the old book which he was carrying, it was very old book and it had its edges worn out. And says, and he held it open on his knees with his great spectacles lying across the pages. So the old man holding this book primer open on his knees with his great spectacles lying across the pages as if he was reading something from the book and says, while I was wondering about it all, M. Hamel mounted his chair and in the same grave and gentle tone which he had used to me said, my children, this is the last lesson I shall give you. So here he is saying that while I was wondering about it all, that means as he was thinking why this is happening and why they are sitting very quietly, suddenly M. Hamel mounted on his chair. That means M. Hamel stood up from his chair and in the same grave and gentle tone which he had used to me, that means in a gentle and soft tone, M. Hamel said something to the class and said, my children, this is the last lesson I shall give you. So M. Hamel started speaking something and he told the children that this is the last lesson which I am going to teach you today. The order has come from Berlin to teach only German in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. So here he is saying that the order has come from Berlin to teach only German. So now he understood that why these people gathered in front of the bulletin board and what was news all about. So as you know that in the war, the French were defeated by the Prussians and now the Germans had taken over its two states, Alsace and Lorraine. So there was an order from Berlin to telling them that only German will be taught in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine, and it was very surprising thing for France, and says the new master comes tomorrow, this is your last French lesson. So later on his teacher M. Hamel said that the new teacher will be arriving tomorrow who will teach you German and this is your last French lesson. That means French lesson will not be taught anymore from tomorrow onwards, and says I want you to be very attentive. So as you know that it was the last day of their French lesson, so his teacher M. Hamel wanted to all the students to be very careful and attentive and focused while reading because it was the last lesson, and says what a thunderclap these words were to me. So here after hearing M. Hamel, the little Franz could not believe what he heard and said, what a thunderclap, that means something that is startling and unexpected. So this news was unexpected for him that only German will be taught from the next day onwards and no more French lessons going to be taught. So this was the news people were reading from the notice board. Further, he says, "Oh, the riches, that was what they had put up at the town hall." So, here, as he knew that French lesson will not be taught anymore, and then he felt, "Oh, the riches, that means this is very unfortunate that we are not allowed to learn our own language." And that was what they had put up at the town hall. So, as I already told you, that he understood why these people were standing in front of the town hall, or in front of the town hall notice board, because of this bad news, and that was all about the French language. And it says that French language will not be taught anymore, and only German will be taught in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. And says, "My last French lesson, why, I hardly knew how to write." So he was very sad and disappointed because it was his last French lesson, and then he was thinking, "I hardly knew how to write." That means at that time even he doesn't know how to write something in French, and it was his beginning how to write properly in French. And says, "I should never learn anymore." So he was feeling very sad that I should never learn anymore. That means he is not going to learn French language anymore, and only German will be taught. And says, "I must stop there then. Oh, how sorry I was for not learning my lessons, for seeking birds' eggs or going sliding on the Saar." So he was feeling very sad and sorry, and started criticizing himself. "Oh, how sorry I was for not learning my lessons." That means he did not pay attention to his lessons during the class. So especially the French lesson, and instead of learning the lesson, he went for seeking birds' eggs or going sledding on the Saar. That means he wasted his time when things were right, and instead of going to the school, he used to go out there and play around, just not bothering about his lesson. So he was feeling very sad and regretting not learning his lesson properly. My books that had seemed such a nuisance a while ago, so heavy to carry, my grammar and my history of the saints, were old friends now that I couldn't give up. So here he is saying that my books that had seemed such a nuisance while ago. That means he was thinking about his books, that earlier his books bothered him a lot and he didn't like carry his book, and he felt that his all books had problematic and so heavy to carry while going to the school while ago. But now he realized the value or importance of these books, such as grammar book and history book, and now these books became like his old friends, and he did not want to give them up at the last moment, because all books were written in French language, and now he got to know the value of his mother tongue, and it was the French language. Further he says, "And M. Hamel too, the idea that was going away, that I should never see him again, made me forget all about his ruler and how cranky he was." So as you know that he did not want to throw away his book because he realized the importance of his own language. And says M. Hamel too, the idea that he was going away, that means he also did not want to lose his teacher M. Hamel, and he was feeling very sad for his teacher M. Hamel, and said he started feeling nice to his teacher and forgot all about his ruler and how cranky he was. So he just forgot how cruel his teacher was and all about his iron ruler, which he used to hit the children, and how he behaved with him earlier in the classroom. Poor man, it was in honor of this last lesson that he had put on his fine Sunday clothes. So here the little Franz is calling his teacher poor man. That means he is feeling very sorry for his teacher, and understood why his teacher wore this special dress on his fine Sunday clothes, because it was in honor of this last lesson. And says, "And now I understood why the old man of the village was sitting there in the back of the room." So now he understood that why the old man of the village was sitting there. That means why the village people were sitting inside the classroom, and why they were so silent and had occupied the last benches. And says it was because they were sorry too that they had not gone to school more. So he also understood that why the children were sitting very quietly, because they were very sorry that they had not gone to school more. That means the children also understood that they are not going to learn French language anymore in the schools, and little Franz also realized that he had also not used the opportunity to go to the school and learn French language. So this is the end of the first part of the chapter, the last lesson, written by Alphonse Daudet. Let's look at the second part of the chapter in my next video. For more informative videos, do subscribe my channel, hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever new video will be uploaded. So thank you so much for watching once again. Stay safe, stay healthy.